Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we are traveling back to a moment when distance itself began to feel smaller, when iron rails stretched across vast plains, harsh deserts, and towering mountains, binding a young nation together in ways few could have imagined. This is the story of the Transcontinental Railroad, a project born from ambition, urgency, and belief in progress, even when the cost was uncertain and the path ahead was unclear. It is a story shaped by human hands and human choices, by laborers who faced freezing winters and blistering heat, by engineers who measured landscapes that seemed endless, by communities transformed overnight and others left behind by the sound of passing trains. It is a story where innovation met endurance, and where hope traveled the same tracks as risk, conflict, and change. As we explore this remarkable chapter of history, we will drift through mountain passes and open plains, through booming camps and quiet stations, following the line that reshaped travel, time, and the idea of connection itself. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, allow your breathing to slow. Let your shoulders soften. Let the day loosen its hold as your thoughts begin to wander along the rails of this fascinating story. Let's begin. On May 10th, 1869, rails met at Promontory Summit. A remote stretch of land in Utah became a national stage when the last gap finally closed. For years, crews had been pushing toward each other through landscapes that refused to cooperate. Granite, wind, heat, snow, and exhaustion all tried to slow the work. Then, in one carefully arranged moment, the final section of track turned months of grinding labor into a single, simple connection. People gathered around the polished tie and the waiting locomotives. Officials gave speeches that tried to capture the scale of what had happened. Photographers framed the scene so the country could see it later. One hammer, one spike, and one short stretch of rail marked the end of an era of separation. In that instant, a journey that once felt like leaving the world behind became something you could plan. Two rival companies raced, the Central Pacific West, Union Pacific East. The project was built as a meeting, but it was also built as a contest. Each company earned money and land based on how much track it completed, so every mile carried a financial heartbeat. Decisions were shaped by grades and rivers, but also by politics, investors, and pride. The competition pushed crews to work faster and to keep moving even when conditions were brutal. It also led to bold promises and sharp tactics, because being first mattered. Survey stakes became quiet arguments about the future. Camp rumors could change plans overnight. The race produced astonishing feats of organization, because supplies had to arrive like clockwork. It also created pressure that could turn deadly when haste met explosives, storms, and fatigue. When the rails finally touched, it looked like harmony, but the story underneath was a long tug of ambition from both directions, each side determined to arrive on its own terms. The Golden Spike moment was broadcast by telegraph, like live national news. The ceremony did not only happen in Utah. It happened across wires, because telegraph operators linked the final hammer blows to waiting crowds far away. A special connection was set up so the tapping signal could carry the rhythm of the moment. In cities and small towns, people gathered around telegraph offices, newspapers, and railroad depots. They waited for the signal that would tell them the line was complete. When the message arrived, bells rang, cannons fired, and celebrations broke out as if a distant victory had happened at their own doorstep. It was an early taste of a world where major events could be shared almost instantly. The railroad brought speed on the ground, but the telegraph brought speed to the mind. Together, they made the continent feel more like one place that could react in real time. Coast-to-coast travel fell from months to roughly 1 week. Before the rails connected, crossing the country could mean jolting wagons, muddy roads, river crossings, and long stretches where supplies were never certain. Some people went by sea, which could be faster, but storms and disease made that route a gamble too. After the connection, a traveler could buy a ticket and trust that timetables would lead them onward. The change was not only speed, it was predictability. Letters could follow a schedule. Business plans could include delivery dates. Families separated by thousands of miles could imagine seeing each other again without risking a season of their lives. The journey still demanded patience, soot, noise, and cramped cars, but the continent no longer felt like a set of disconnected worlds. When travel time collapses, imagination changes with it. New opportunities appear, and so do new pressures and new conflicts. Most Central Pacific track crews were Chinese immigrants facing brutal Sierra winters. Thousands of men did the hardest work with little recognition, and their endurance shaped the line more than any speech. Many came from Guangdong with hopes that wages could support families across an ocean. They handled grading, rockwork, and rail placement in terrain where mistakes could mean a fall, a blast, or a burial in snow. In winter, storms piled drifts higher than a person, and wind cut through canvas like knives. Crews dug out paths, repaired damage, and tried to keep moving when the mountains seemed to erase their progress overnight. They also built strong camp routines. Hot meals, tea, and careful cooking helped keep strength up in punishing conditions. Even so, prejudice followed them, and credit often went elsewhere. Their story is not only about labor. It is about the way a nation depended on people it often refused to fully welcome, even while their work made the impossible real. Union Pacific crews pushed across the plains while Hell-on Wheels towns followed. As track advanced, a moving edge of tents, saloons, and gambling tables advanced with it. These temporary towns could appear in days because workers needed food, supplies, and distraction after exhausting shifts. With so many wages paid at once, merchants and opportunists rushed in. Violence was common, and law often arrived late or not at all. Yet these places were not only chaos. They were also engines of logistics. Blacksmiths repaired tools. Teamsters hauled freight. Cooks fed crews by the hundreds. Newspapers and entertainers followed the money and the audience. When the rails moved on, the town could vanish just as quickly, leaving only ruts and memories. Some settlements collapsed. Others stayed and became permanent communities, anchored by the very treks that had summoned them. It is a strange kind of urban growth, built at speed and then tested by whether it could survive once the frontier spotlight moved on. Track gangs could lay astonishing distances in a single competitive day. There were days when the work turned into a spectacle because speed itself became something to prove. A track gang moved like a choreographed storm. One team carried rails with tongs, another set them down, another aligned joints, another drove spikes with a rhythm that could be heard far across open country. Supply wagons stayed close so no one had to stop and wait for hardware. Foremen shouted short commands that kept everything moving forward without confusion. The ground behind them transformed in minutes, from bare grade to a finished path that looked inevitable, as if it had always been meant to be there. People came to watch because the pace felt impossible, and because the outcome mattered to company pride and pay. Yet the most startling part was how many small actions had to go right, again and again, to keep that speed from turning into chaos. In those rare bursts of momentum, you can hear an entire era believing that progress could be measured in miles per day. Fuel stops decided where towns would grow and where they would not. The railroad did not only connect places, it also created places by choosing where it would pause. Steam engines needed fuel, and that need turned certain locations into anchors on the map. A stop that began as a practical refueling point could attract a store, then a hotel, then a post office, then a steady population that no longer planned to leave. Land around these points gained value quickly, which drew speculators and families with different dreams. Meanwhile, a settlement that hoped for prosperity could be left behind by a single routing decision. People watched survey stakes like omens, because being on the line meant customers, shipments, and a future that felt plugged into the country. Being off the line could mean isolation that deepened with every passing year. The result was a landscape of winners and losers shaped by everyday needs like fuel and water. It is a reminder that the geography of opportunity is often built from practical decisions that look small at the time. Food camps, mess tents, and supply depots became rolling miniature cities. To build a railroad, you first had to feed a railroad. Along the advancing grade, kitchens and store tents sprang up with a kind of practiced urgency. Flour, beans, salted meat, tea, and coffee had to appear where yesterday there was only grass or sage. A good cook could steady morale better than any speech, because exhaustion feels different after a hot meal. Supply depots worked like frontier warehouses. They held spikes, tools, lamp oil, rope, and replacement parts that could not be improvised. Teamsters and wagon trains moved like arteries between railheads and camps, hauling what the next miles would demand. At night, the camps became their own little worlds, full of clatter, card games, arguments, laughter, and sudden quiet. When the track moved on, the city moved too. It was a strange kind of civilization, built to vanish, yet vital to everything ahead. Immigrant laborers built the line while often being erased from photographs. The famous images tend to show officials, engineers, and polished locomotives. Many of the hands that carried rails and swung hammers were pushed to the edges or left out entirely. This was not an accident of the camera. It reflected the social world of the time. Chinese workers faced open prejudice and violence, even while their discipline and endurance kept progress moving through the Sierra. Irish and other immigrant workers faced their own hostility and were often treated as replaceable muscle rather than skilled builders. Yet these laborers created the daily miracles. They organized gangs, learned techniques, adapted to new tools, and kept working in weather that made survival itself impressive. When the moment of celebration arrived, credit drifted upward. The work stayed down in the dirt, in the snow, and in the blistered hands. Remembering this matters because the railroad was not built by symbols. It was built by people whose names rarely appeared in headlines, yet whose effort still lies under every mile of track. Winter blizzards buried camps, forcing crews to dig and rebuild repeatedly. In the high country, winter did not arrive politely. It arrived like a shutdown notice from nature. Snow could fall hard for days, piling into drifts that swallowed tents, tools, and even sections of track. Wind sculpted the snow into walls that refused to stay cleared. Crews woke to find their work erased, and then had to decide what mattered first. Rescue the supplies, clear the path, rebuild the shelter. Sometimes the snow carried a deeper threat. Avalanche terrain could shift without warning, and even small slides could smash equipment or block routes. This cycle of loss and repair tested morale in a way that no rocky cut ever could. You can blast rock once, and it stays blasted. Snow returns. Yet the railroad demanded persistence, so men dug, hauled, and tried again. The blizzards turned the project into a lesson in endurance, where progress meant accepting that some victories last only until the next storm. The Central Pacific fought avalanches as much as it fought rock. Avalanches are not just snow. They are moving weight, and they can hit like a freight train made of ice. In the Sierra, steep slopes and heavy storms created conditions where a hillside could suddenly let go. Crews learned to read the mountains in winter, listening for cracks and watching for fresh fractures in the snowpack. Even so, surprises came. A slide could bury track, smash buildings, and sweep away months of effort in seconds. The response required both courage and planning. Work parties went out to dig out the line, knowing that a second slide could follow. Engineers began to design defenses that shaped where the railroad could safely run, because the mountain was not only a barrier of stone, it was a machine that could move. This struggle also changed the railroad's relationship with seasons. Schedules had to account for danger, and maintenance became a constant battle. When passengers later glided through those high passes, they saw scenery. The builders saw a living hazard waiting above the rails. Fresh foods and manufactured goods reached interior towns with new regularity. Before reliable rail service, many inland communities depended on whatever could be grown locally or hauled in at great expense. The railroad changed the menu and the marketplace. Canned goods, flour, coffee, and sugar could arrive in larger quantities, and prices often became more predictable. Manufactured items followed, from stoves and tools to fabric and furniture, turning distant factories into everyday suppliers. For some towns, this meant comfort and convenience that had felt out of reach. For others, it created competition that threatened local crafts and small-scale producers. The flow also worked in reverse. Local products could now be shipped outward, which encouraged specialization and new kinds of farming and ranching. Regular deliveries shaped routine. Store shelves could be stocked with expectations rather than hopes. Travelers brought tastes and habits from elsewhere, and communities began to feel less isolated in culture, as well as commerce. A railroad timetable can become a community calendar. When the freight train comes, life feels connected to a wider world. Tourism to the west began to feel possible for ordinary travelers. For a long time, visiting the West was not a vacation. It was a relocation, a business mission, or a dangerous adventure. The transcontinental connection began to change that mindset. Travelers could imagine a journey with planned stops, reserved seats, and a reasonable chance of arriving on schedule. Hotels and restaurants near depots learned to cater to outsiders, and guides began to market scenery as an attraction rather than an obstacle. The West's dramatic landscapes gained a new kind of audience, including people who wanted stories and views more than land or gold. This shift also shaped how the West was presented. Rail companies promoted routes with brochures and promises, turning geography into a product. For many visitors, the first glimpse of vast plains or mountain ranges came through a train window, framed by smoke and speed. Tourism might sound light compared to construction and conflict, yet it matters. It shows how quickly the railroad turned distance into experience. When ordinary people can go and come back, the map becomes personal. The Union Pacific battled shortages of wood, water, and steady supplies. Crossing open country sounds easier than crossing mountains, until you try to support thousands of workers in places with few trees and uncertain water. On the plains, timber could be scarce where it was needed most. Ties, bridges, buildings, and even cooking fires all demanded wood. Water sources could be far apart or unreliable, which turned planning into a daily calculation. Supplies moved by wagon, and as the line grew, by rail itself, but any delay could ripple outward. A broken axle could mean a missing tool shipment. A muddy road could mean empty store tents. Crews improvised, using what the land offered, but the land sometimes offered very little. This constant tightrope affected speed and safety. It also created a strange dependence on the railroad's own progress, because every new mile made it easier to bring in what the next mile required. The project had to keep moving to feed itself. In that loop, you can feel the urgency that drove Union Pacific forward, mile after hard-won mile. The route crossed indigenous homelands, and it intensified conflict and displacement. Steel did not arrive on empty ground. The grade cut through places where nations had lived, hunted, traded, and held ceremony for generations. Survey stakes and construction camps brought sudden pressure because they claimed water, grass, timber, and movement corridors that had long sustained life. Treaties were often ignored or rewritten under duress, and promises made in distant offices rarely matched realities on the ground. As the rails advanced, so did new fences, new towns, and new laws that favored newcomers. For many native communities, the railroad became a fast-moving boundary that split routes and disrupted seasonal patterns. It also brought an accelerating wave of settlers and soldiers that made resistance harder and survival more precarious. When people celebrate a continent being connected, it is worth remembering that this connection carried a terrible price. The tracks created opportunity for some and forced upheaval for others, with consequences that still echo today. The line helped standardize timekeeping, because schedules demanded shared clocks. When travel takes months, time can stay local. When travel takes days, minutes begin to matter. Trains needed timetables, and timetables needed agreement about what a given hour actually meant. Town clocks that had been set by the sun began to clash with railroad schedules, because noon in one place was not noon in another. That mismatch was more than confusing. It could be dangerous on single-track lines where trains relied on precise meeting points. Rail companies pushed for consistent time signals so stations, dispatchers, and conductors could coordinate. Jewelers sold reliable watches to travelers who wanted to keep up with departures. Newspapers printed schedules that taught people to think in shared hours rather than purely local ones. The change crept into daily life. Shop opening times, courthouse hours, and social plans began to align with the railroad's sense of punctuality. It is a subtle revolution. The rails did not just connect geography. They trained society to live by clocks that agreed across distance. Before time zones, railroads still forced local towns to coordinate time. Formal time zones came later, but the pressure arrived as soon as trains did. A station could not simply run on its own solar noon if the next station was running on something slightly different. Even small discrepancies created headaches for connections and freight transfers, and they raised safety worries when dispatching depended on clear timing. Many towns adopted what was sometimes called railroad time, setting public clocks to match the company's schedule rather than the sun's exact position. That meant a community might live by a time that felt slightly wrong in a natural sense, yet right in a practical sense. People learned to carry two ideas at once: local time for tradition and railroad time for travel and business. Over time, practicality tended to win. A traveler crossing the country needed fewer mental adjustments, and merchants needed reliable arrival windows. This period is fascinating because it shows a nation rehearsing for modern coordination. Without changing the sky, the railroad began changing how people agreed about it. Land grants created checkerboards of railroad property across the West. To encourage construction, the government offered vast stretches of land beside the line. The pattern often alternated, with railroad parcels beside public parcels, which produced a patchwork that looked like a checkerboard on a map. This did more than reward the company. It set the stage for a new kind of settlement. The railroad could sell or lease its parcels, and the promise of nearby transport made those acres suddenly desirable. The pattern also created confusion and conflict. Neighbors might live under different rules, pay different prices, or face different access depending on which square they stood on. Roads, fences, and water rights could become tangled because ownership was literally alternating across the landscape. Over time, the checkerboard affected conservation, grazing, and development because land use could not be planned as one continuous whole. It is a striking example of policy becoming geography. A decision made in distant chambers became visible on the ground for generations, shaping who could live where and how the West could be used. Rail companies marketed those lands to settlers, investors, and immigrants. Once the railroad held land, it needed buyers. That turned rail executives into storytellers and salespeople. They promoted the West as a place where opportunity was not just possible, but waiting. Pamphlets and ads promised fertile soil, clear skies, and access to markets through the very tracks being built. Some campaigns reached overseas, inviting immigrants to purchase farms and start new lives with rail service nearby. Agents described routes, prices, and terms, and they often painted a future that sounded stable and bright. For many families, this marketing became a doorway. It offered a plan that felt concrete. Buy land, ride the train, build a home, ship crops. Yet the reality could be harsher. Drought, debt, and isolation still existed, even with rails. The marketing mattered because it helped populate the corridor, and population made the railroad stronger. It was a feedback loop of persuasion and settlement, where the company sold land to create customers, and customers made the land more valuable. Real estate decisions sometimes mattered as much as engineering decisions. A route can be technically possible and still be financially foolish, and the railroad had to think about both. Choosing where to run track influenced which land would rise in value, which towns would form, and which investors would benefit. A slight bend in the line could turn empty land into a future business district. It could also make someone rich overnight if they owned the right parcels. That reality created lobbying, bargaining, and sometimes bribery, because people understood that the rails would shape the map of winners. Engineers might argue for a safer grade, while promoters argued for a path that boosted development potential. Station locations became powerful decisions too. A stop meant foot traffic, freight, and a reason for a store to open. Without a stop, a place could stay invisible. In this way, the railroad was not only conquering nature, it was also designing a marketplace. The land itself became part of the project's logic, and the future economy was quietly rooted alongside the track. Towns skipped by the tracks often withered, while rail towns boomed. In the 19th century, being connected meant being alive in a commercial sense. A town that missed the railroad could watch its customers, mail, and newcomers drift toward the nearest depot. Merchants faced a brutal arithmetic. Goods delivered by wagon were slower and costlier than goods delivered by rail. Farmers preferred to ship from stations that offered better prices and dependable schedules. Hotels and restaurants followed travelers, and travelers followed timetables. Meanwhile, a new rail town could grow with startling speed. A platform became a street. A street became a grid. Schools, churches, and newspapers arrived soon after. Some communities tried to adapt by building roads to railheads or by lobbying for spur lines, but not all succeeded. The change could feel personal, like history choosing favorites. The railroad did not just shorten travel, it reorganized settlement. It created hubs, left gaps, and turned geography into destiny for countless small places that had no vote in the decision. The golden spike was removed, because a real railroad needed an iron spike. A ceremonial object can be dazzling, but it is not always built for the grind of daily use. The golden spike was meant to symbolize completion and unity, not to hold rail under constant vibration and weight. Once the cameras and speeches were done, practicality returned. The line needed a spike that could bite into wood and resist loosening under pounding wheels. So the ceremonial piece was taken out, and a standard iron spike took its place. That swap is a perfect snapshot of how history works. People remember the glittering symbol, yet the railroad depended on ordinary hardware that was tough, cheap, and replaceable. The change also hints at how quickly the work turned back into routine. Celebration lasted an afternoon. Maintenance lasted forever. Every day after the ceremony, trains demanded reliability, not drama. Removing the golden spike did not reduce the achievement. It underlined it. The continent was not joined by jewelry. It was joined by iron doing its job. The project was fueled by Civil War-era laws and enormous land grants. The railroad was not simply a private dream. It was a national strategy. During the Civil War, leaders feared that the West could drift away without stronger ties. Congress passed legislation that offered loans and massive stretches of public land because the country wanted steel links as much as it wanted victory. The idea was simple and daring. Build the line, then sell land beside it to help pay the bills. That promise attracted investors, and it also created temptations. When land becomes a reward for speed, every mile can turn into a chase for profit rather than a careful plan for the best route. The policy helped create towns and farms where none had existed because rail companies promoted settlement to raise land value. It also gave corporations extraordinary influence over the geography of growth. The railroad is often remembered as engineering. It is also a story about how government power and private ambition intertwined to reshape the map. In the mountains, workers blasted tunnels through granite with dangerous nitroglycerin. Granite does not negotiate. To cross the Sierra, crews had to pierce rock that resisted drills, powder, and human patience. Work began with hand drilling, which meant two people swinging and turning steel into stone for hours to make a single hole. Early blasting used black powder, but harder rock demanded more force. Nitroglycerin arrived with its terrifying promise. It could shatter stone, and it could also explode from a jolt, a spill, or an unlucky mistake. Transporting it was hazardous. Storing it was worse. Using it in tight tunnels tested nerves as much as skill. Progress came in feet, not miles, and the air underground could become thick with dust and fumes. Yet the tunnels slowly lengthened, because there was no other path forward. When trains later rushed through those dark passages in minutes, it was easy to forget how much danger and persistence had been packed into every yard of carved stone. Snow sheds were built so trains could survive deep Sierra drifts. The Sierra Nevada could bury a track overnight, and a buried track might as well not exist. To keep the route open, builders created long wooden structures that covered the rails like a roofed corridor. These snow sheds guided avalanches over the top and kept drifts from filling the line. They were not small shelters. Some stretched for miles, built from heavy timber that had to be cut, hauled, and fitted in harsh mountain weather. Inside, trains rumbled through a dim wooden tunnel where sparks and smoke could turn the air bitter. Fires were a constant risk because steam engines threw cinders and the sheds were made of wood. Still, without these structures, winter would have stopped commerce, mail, and travel for long stretches. The sheds were a reminder that conquering distance was not a one-time victory. It required ongoing defenses against nature, built into the landscape, year after year. Keeping the promise of connection meant engineering for the worst day, not the best. Two locomotives posed nose to nose, Jupiter and number 119. The famous photograph captures more than machines. It captures two worlds meeting at a single rail. One engine represented the Central Pacific's long struggle through the Sierra. The other represented the Union Pacific's drive across plains and high passes. Crews climbed onto pilots and steps, packing the frame with faces and hats because they wanted proof they had been there. The engines themselves were symbols of the age. Steam, iron, brass, and wood combined into power you could feel in your chest. They also carried pride because railroads were businesses that sold confidence as much as tickets. After the celebration, the locomotives returned to ordinary work, pulling trains, taking wear, and fading into history's background noise. Yet the image remained. It became a shorthand for a national turning point. When people picture the joining of the continent, they often picture those two noses nearly touching and a crowd leaning in as if the future is about to move. Sacramento became the western launch point for the Central Pacific's gamble. In the early 1860s, Sacramento was a river city with muddy streets, busy wharves, and a restless confidence that California's future could be built, not Abra. Waited for. Local leaders and merchants watched the Sierra rise like a wall to the east, and they still chose to stake fortunes on getting through it. Workshops filled with the clang of iron and the smell of fresh-cut timber. Wagons creaked under loads of tools, rope, and supplies that had to be gathered before a single rail could be set with momentum. The city became a headquarters of decisions. Who gets hired, who gets paid, what gets shipped, and which route is worth the risk. Each choice sent ripples through families, banks, and businesses. When the first track stretched out of town, it carried more than trains. It carried Sacramento's reputation into the mountains, 1 mile at a time. Omaha became the eastern staging ground for Union Pacific's Great Push. Omaha sat on the edge of the Missouri River, and it learned to live with the constant arrival of people who wanted to go farther than the horizon. Clerks, engineers, carpenters, and speculators poured in, each carrying a different kind of urgency. The river itself became a problem to solve. Freight had to be ferried, stored, counted, and guarded before it could be sent west. Schedules mattered because a delayed shipment could strand a crew in open country with nothing to work with. Hotels filled. Warehouses multiplied. Newspapers buzzed with rumors about routes, contracts, and the next big opportunity. Omaha also became a place where East met West in a single crowded street, with polished boots beside dust-coated coats. From that pressure cooker of planning and supply, the advance began. Each departing trainload felt like a promise leaving town, and the town learned to measure its own heartbeat in departures. Rails, spikes, and locomotives reached California by ship before meeting the mountains. Before a train could climb inland, the steel and machinery had to arrive by water, and that alone could feel like a voyage of faith. Heavy rails were loaded into ship holds like stacked ribs. Crates of hardware were packed so tightly that a single damaged shipment could slow weeks of work. Steam engines, massive and delicate at the same time, were handled like expensive secrets. A long sea journey meant salt air, storms, and delays that no foreman could argue with. Once in California, cargo moved again, from docks to depots, from depots to wagons, and from wagons to the growing line. Every transfer added risk. A dropped crate could mean missing parts. A late ship could mean idle crews and empty pay envelopes. It is easy to picture railroads as land stories. In truth, the ocean helped deliver the continent's first pieces of motion, one careful shipment at a time. Every mile demanded ties, ballast, and careful grading, long before rails arrived. What people remember is the shining track, but the real work often happened before a single rail was even visible. Crews had to carve a roadbed that could carry enormous weight without sinking, slipping, or washing away. That meant smoothing uneven ground, shaping drainage, and building up low places until the route could hold steady through rain and thaw. Wooden ties were laid like a long, measured heartbeat, spaced to spread the load and keep the track true. Then came ballast, the broken stone that locked everything in place and helped water drain away instead of pooling under the line. It was gritty work with shovels and temping bars, and it demanded patience because a rushed foundation became a future derailment. Only after this hidden layer felt solid could rails be set and spiked down. The speed of the finished railroad depended on slow choices made in dirt and stone, long before the first locomotive appeared. Surveyors chose routes that balanced distance, grades, water, and political pressure. Before the hammers and shovels, there were men walking with instruments, notebooks, and a quiet kind of authority. Surveying was part mathematics, part endurance, and part negotiation with the land. A shorter route could still be a bad route if the climb was too steep for engines or the valley flooded each spring. A gentler grade might demand a longer line, which meant more cost and more time. Water mattered because camps and engines both depended on it, and dry stretches could turn a promising path into a trap. Then came political pressure, which could be as stubborn as any mountain. Towns wanted the line. Investors wanted profit. Officials wanted milestones they could claim. Surveyors had to translate all of that into stakes driven into soil and rock, as if a thin wooden marker could settle arguments about the future. Many of the West's later towns, roads, and boundaries grew from those early choices, made with a compass, a level, and a lot of human persuasion. The Sierra Nevada forced climbing strategies that reshaped locomotive engineering. A steam engine can be powerful, but it still has to obey gravity, and the Sierra taught that lesson with every mile. Grades had to be designed so locomotives could climb without losing traction, which pushed builders to carve longer approaches and search for workable passes. Even then, engines faced a problem of balance. They needed enough weight on driving wheels to grip the rails, yet too much weight could strain bridges and track. Power had to be steady, not only strong, because slipping wheels could turn progress into wasted steam and polished rail. Railroads responded with new practices, including the use of extra locomotives to help push heavy trains uphill, and careful management of loads to keep climbs safe. The mountain also shaped braking strategies for the descent, because speed on a downgrade could turn deadly without discipline. The Sierra did not just slow trains. It forced railroading to become smarter, more coordinated, and more attentive to the physics of every ton being moved. Cuttings and fills moved entire hillsides to keep grades manageable. Sometimes the shortest path was blocked by a ridge, and the choice was simple in theory and brutal in practice. Either go around or move the land. Cuttings meant slicing into a hill until a train could pass through at the right height. Fills meant taking that excavated earth and building up the low places, creating an artificial embankment strong enough to carry a locomotive. This was not a neat job. It involved blasting, digging, hauling, and dumping over and over until the landscape began to look engineered rather than natural. A single weak spot could settle, crack, or wash out, which meant crews had to shape and compact the material so it behaved like solid ground. Rain tested their work, and so did time. When you ride a smooth stretch of track today, it is easy to miss the scale of those early earthworks. Yet in many places, the railroad is not lying on the land. It is sitting on land that humans rearranged, because the grade had to be right. Mountain tunnels began with hand drills, sledgehammers, and black powder. At the mouth of a tunnel, progress started as a small scar on stone. Two workers would hold and turn a steel drill while another swung a sledgehammer, striking in a steady cadence that echoed off rock walls. Each hole took time, and each hole mattered, because it was the place where powder would later do its work. Black powder blasts could break rock, but the results were unpredictable. Sometimes a shot loosened a clean chunk. Sometimes it shattered into jagged fragments that still had to be pried free by hand. Smoke and dust filled the confined space, and fresh air was never guaranteed. When the rubble was cleared, the cycle began again. Drill, hammer, load, retreat, blast, clear. Days might produce only a few feet, which demanded patience that borders on obsession. A tunnel is a strange promise. You are digging toward darkness, trusting that two separate headings will one day meet in the middle. When it finally happens, it feels like the mountain has been persuaded to open a door. Chinese crews often worked from rope baskets on sheer granite walls. Some sections of route offered no safe footing, so crews made their own. Rope baskets were lowered down cliff faces, and workers descended into open air with drills and tools suspended above the slope like lanterns. From there, they chipped ledges, set charges, and cleared loose stone so the roadbed could be carved into the mountain's flank. The danger was immediate. A frayed rope, a falling rock, or a sudden gust could turn one moment into the last. Yet this method allowed work to continue where a scaffold would have been slow to build or impossible to anchor. It also demanded trust in the people holding the lines above, because every movement depended on teamwork. The image is startling because it is so direct. No machine buffer, no protective barrier, just skill and nerve against vertical stone. When the track later ran along those ledges, passengers saw a dramatic view. They rarely saw the human courage that cut the view into existence. Paydays, shortages, and storms could stop progress more surely than mountains. Sometimes the most dangerous obstacle was not a cliff or a river. It was the day the supply train did not show. A crew without spikes cannot lay rail. A crew without food cannot work long. Add late wages to that mix, and the whole machine begins to seize. Payday was more than money. It was trust. When envelopes arrived on time, men stayed. When they did not, rumors spread fast, tempers rose, and the work line thinned. Then there were storms that turned roads into glue and rivers into walls. A single cloudburst could wash out a grade that had taken weeks to shape. A hard freeze could snap timbers and crack equipment. These interruptions created a special kind of tension because the race for mileage never stopped in the minds of rivals and investors. The crews lived inside that pressure. They learned that building across a continent was not only engineering. It was the fragile art of keeping momentum alive. The railroad carried telegraph lines, shrinking the continent's sense of distance. As rails advanced, poles and wire often followed close behind, stitching communication to the same route. A message that once took days by rider could now leap across hundreds of miles in minutes, and that changed how people thought about separation. Dispatchers used telegraph clicks to coordinate trains, which mattered because a single track demands careful timing. Business owners could order goods and get answers quickly. Families could send news that felt urgent rather than historical by the time it arrived. Newsrooms began to treat faraway events as immediate, because the wire made them feel close. Even weather and disasters could be reported while they were still unfolding. The telegraph was not a side feature. It was a second railroad for information, running beside the first. Together, they made the nation feel tighter, faster, and more connected. even while the land between remained vast and demanding. Water towers became lifelines for steam engines in dry country. A steam locomotive is a moving furnace that drinks, and in arid stretches the question was simple: where will the next water be? Engines could burn plenty of fuel, but without water, they were helpless iron. So, water stops became planned points of survival. Towers were built where wells could be drilled, where springs could be tapped, or where water could be stored after hauling it in. Crews had to keep pumps working and tanks from leaking, because a failure could strand trains far from help. In hot weather, evaporation and dust made the task harder. In winter, freezing could turn pipes into brittle traps. For passengers, a water stop could feel like a brief pause in emptiness. For railroad planners, it was a heartbeat that set the rhythm of the entire route. Towns and camps clustered near these lifelines because water pulled humans as surely as it pulled engines. Rail construction created new markets for timber, iron, and coal. Building a transcontinental line required a hunger for materials that could swallow entire forests and keep asking for more. Ties demanded timber. Bridges demanded timber. Camps demanded timber. Rails demanded iron and later steel, which meant mines, mills, and transport networks working at full strain. Coal and wood fed locomotives and construction engines, so fuel became its own industry along the route. Each order triggered a chain reaction of jobs. Loggers cut and hauled. Foundries cast parts. Blacksmiths repaired tools worn down by constant use. Freight schedules filled with raw materials moving one direction and finished supplies moving the other. The railroad is often described as a single project, but it acted like a magnet for the entire economy, pulling resources into motion. It also made certain regions valuable in new ways. A stand of straight timber, a seam of coal, or an iron deposit could suddenly matter, because rails created a dependable path to buyers. In that way, construction was also a reshaping of American industry. Army forts and rail depots became linked parts of the same frontier system. Once trains could move men and supplies quickly, military strategy changed from slow marches to planned logistics. Forts that had once felt isolated began to operate like nodes on a network. Rail depots stored food, ammunition, uniforms, and equipment, and trains delivered them on schedules that commanders could actually rely on. Troops could be shifted to hop spots far faster than before, which altered how conflicts unfolded and how quickly force could be concentrated. The railroad also made it easier to build and reinforce forts because lumber, hardware, and even heavy guns could travel inland without being dragged over endless roads. Around many posts, civilian settlements grew because merchants followed the steady demand created by soldiers and train crews. In practice, the line did not only carry passengers. It carried state power. It extended government reach into distant territories, and it helped lock frontier policy to steel timetables rather than seasonal travel. That relationship shaped the West's balance of authority for decades. Buffalo hunting for railroad camps helped accelerate the bison's collapse. The bison herds were once so large that travelers described the plains as moving. Railroad construction brought thousands of hungry workers, and the demand for meat created a ruthless incentive to kill. Hunters supplied camps with fresh protein, and trains later made it possible to ship hides and other products to distant markets. The railroad also made hunting easier in a simple way. It brought people, weapons, and ammunition into regions that had been harder to reach in large numbers. Some riders even shot bison from train windows for sport, treating living animals like passing targets. The result was a catastrophic decline that shook the entire plains ecosystem. For many indigenous nations, bison were not only food. They were shelter, tools, clothing, and a foundation of culture and economy. As the herds vanished, hunger and dependency spread. The railroad did not cause every shot fired, but it made the destruction faster, wider, and harder to stop. Rail access changed plains warfare, speeding troops, weapons, and communications. Before trains, distance could protect a community for weeks or months, because armies moved at the pace of wagons and horses. With rail access, the rhythm shifted. Reinforcements could arrive quickly, and campaigns could be sustained with steady resupply rather than fragile foraging. Heavy equipment that had been difficult to haul across open country could now move in bulk, making certain kinds of tactics more feasible. Information also traveled faster. Reports, orders, and requests could be sent along the wire and acted on sooner, which reduced the chance that one side could disappear into vastness without response. For native resistance, this shift was devastating. Mobility had been an advantage, and the railroad helped counter it by tightening the net of pursuit and supply. Even when trains were not on the battlefield, they shaped the battlefield by deciding who could endure. A conflict is not only courage and strategy. It is also food, ammunition, and timing. Railroads changed all three, and the plains were never the same. Mail could cross the continent faster, changing business and personal lives. Letters once traveled with long pauses, waiting for riders, wagons, and ships that could be delayed by weather, illness, or conflict. The railroad introduced a more dependable pulse. Mail cars and station sorting points helped keep correspondence moving, and that speed changed how people spoke to each other across distance. Families could share news that still felt current. A birth announcement, a death notice, or a plea for help could arrive while it still mattered. Businesses also benefited. Orders, invoices, and contracts moved with less uncertainty, which encouraged trade with partners who were far away. Newspapers gained access to information faster, and they filled pages with updates that used to arrive too late to feel urgent. The psychological shift was profound. The West felt less like a remote frontier and more like a reachable neighbor. When communication speeds up, relationships change. People take more risks, plan more boldly, and expect faster answers. The railroad trained an entire society to live in shorter waits. Newspaper stories turned track, laying into a national spectator sport. Reporters treated progress like a serialized drama. Each week brought new mileage claims, new obstacles, and new rivalries to follow. Readers far from the construction line learned the names of passes and rivers as if they were characters. Papers described storms, labor disputes, engineering feats, and celebrations. And those stories helped transform the project into a shared national obsession. This coverage also shaped reputation. A company that looked bold and unstoppable could attract investors and political support, while a company that looked stalled could be punished by rumor. Editors loved superlatives, and their enthusiasm fed public excitement about technology and expansion. The railroad became proof that the country could do big things, even when the details were messy. Yet newspapers also influenced what people remembered. They highlighted certain leaders, minimized certain workers, and often softened the human cost. Still, the media frenzy itself is part of the history. It was an early example of infrastructure becoming entertainment, with a nation emotionally invested in each mile of steel. Some financiers got rich through subsidies, bonds, and complicated corporate schemes. Behind the drama of hammers and locomotives, another race played out in offices and hotel rows. The railroad promised public support, and that promise attracted men who understood paperwork as well as anyone understood rock. Money could arrive through government help, private investment, and debts that were sold and resold. Profit did not always depend on trains running. It could depend on how contracts were written, who controlled supply companies, and how costs were reported. A mile of track could be both an engineering achievement and a financial instrument. That mix created fortunes quickly, and it also created suspicion. People on the ground might see a harsh landscape and a long day's labor. People in boardrooms saw leverage, influence, and a chance to turn national ambition into personal wealth. The result was a project that felt heroic and unsettling at the same time, because the same iron that united the continent also amplified the power of those who held the pen. The Crédit Mobilier scandal exposed how insiders profited from construction contracts. A railroad needs builders, and builders need contracts. The scandal erupted when it became clear that a construction company tied to the railroad's leadership could bill the railroad at inflated rates and then share the profits with insiders. It was a clever loop. Public money and investor money flowed in, and a private circle captured a portion on the way out. When the story surfaced, it hit like a moral derailment. The country had been cheering a national triumph, and suddenly it had to face the machinery of self-dealing underneath. Investigations and headlines followed, and public trust took a blow that lasted long after the track was finished. The most haunting part is how ordinary the method was. It was not a masked robbery. It was signatures, ledgers, and quiet agreements. The scandal became a warning about what can happen when oversight is weak and projects are too big to pause. It showed that grand infrastructure can hide small choices that poison public faith. Government bonds helped fund progress, but they also invited corruption. Bonds were meant to solve a practical problem. Building across the continent required huge spending before the railroad could earn much back. Government-backed bonds offered a way to front the money so track could keep moving. In theory, it was a partnership. The nation would gain connection, and the builders would gain the means to finish. In practice, a guaranteed stream of funding can tempt people to chase reimbursement instead of excellence. Paperwork became a battlefield. Mileage claims mattered because payments were tied to distance completed. Inspectors had influence, and influence can be bought. Every shortcut raised a question. Was the route chosen for sound engineering or for better payouts? Was the work done carefully or quickly? Bonds made the railroad possible at scale, and that matters. Yet they also created a climate where clever accounting could feel as valuable as skilled labor. The story is a reminder that how something is funded can shape how it is built and how it is remembered. The railroad made cattle shipping practical, reshaping ranching on the plains. Before widespread rail shipping, moving cattle to distant buyers often meant long drives with heavy losses. Animals lost weight, got stolen, or died, and ranchers had to gamble on weather and water. Rail transport changed the equation by moving large numbers quickly to markets where demand and prices were higher. That encouraged larger herds and new business models, because a ranch could plan around schedules rather than pure luck. Stockyards and loading pens appeared near depots, turning certain points into bustling livestock centers. The cattle trade also became more standardized. Weight, grading, and timing mattered more when shipments were coordinated across long distances. This shift influenced the landscape too. More ranching meant more competition for grass and water, and it increased pressure to fence ranges that had once been open. The romance of the cowboy era is tied to this moment, but the railroad's role is often the hidden engine. It made ranching less local, more industrial, and far more connected to national appetites. Mining districts gained faster access to equipment, markets, and investors. A mine is useless if it cannot move what it produces, and it struggles if it cannot import what it needs. The railroad changed both sides. Heavy machinery, timber supports, and replacement parts could arrive without being dragged across mountains by slow freight teams. That allowed deeper digging and larger operations because equipment that once felt impossible to haul became merely expensive. On the output side, ore and refined metal could reach smelters and buyers faster, which improved cash flow and encouraged expansion. The railroad also moved people. Engineers, managers, and skilled workers could travel to districts that were previously too remote to staff easily. Investors followed the rail corridors too, because access reduced risk. All of this sped up the boom and bust rhythm that mining towns were known for. When a strike was rich, the rail line could feed the frenzy. When the vein faded, trains could carry people away just as efficiently. Mining and railroading became partners in acceleration, turning distant geology into fast-moving money. The line encouraged massive migration, both hopeful and desperate. When travel becomes predictable, it becomes imaginable, and that imagination pulls people. Some boarded trains with careful plans, savings, and letters of introduction. Others carried little more than a bundle and a belief that somewhere along the line there would be work. The railroad lowered the barrier to movement, which meant more families could attempt a fresh start without surrendering months of their lives to the journey. It also carried sorrow. People fleeing debt, war trauma, or discrimination sometimes saw the West as their last available option. The cars held a mix of languages and expectations, and stations became meeting points where strangers compared rumors like survival tools. Migration reshaped regions quickly. New arrivals changed politics, labor markets, and cultural life, sometimes with welcome, sometimes with violence. The railroad did not invent restlessness, but it gave restlessness a timetable. It turned the act of leaving into something you could do with a ticket. That power is thrilling, and it is also unsettling, because a moving population can transform a place before anyone has time to adjust. The meeting point was moved to influence profits, politics, and mileage bonuses. A single dot on the map carried enormous consequences, because pay and land could hinge on mileage. That meant the where of completion was never only a geographic question. It was a negotiation with sharp elbows. Company leaders argued over measurement, paperwork, and which stretches counted as the most valuable miles. Local boosters wanted the honor nearby because a terminus could bring trade, visitors, and lasting prestige. Rival camps watched each other's moves, since the chosen meeting place could shift leverage in future agreements. Even the timing of decisions mattered, because changing plans late could strand materials and frustrate crews who had already carved a route forward. For workers, the finish line seemed like a fixed destination. For executives and politicians, it was a movable target that could be nudged to favor one ledger over another. The tracks met, but the story of where they met reveals how money and power can bend geography. Rails first met at Promontory Summit, not at Ogden. In later years, many people assumed the famous joining happened in a busier rail town, but the first connection was made out on a high, open stretch of Utah. It was chosen because it served the moment, and the moment needed space for crews, locomotives, and ceremony. A summit like that carries a symbolic weight. You can stand there and feel the land fall away on either side, as if the continent itself is offering a stage. Yet the location was also practical. It allowed both companies to arrive with their own track and their own pride intact. The place was remote enough that the railroad brought the crowd with it, which made the event feel like a destination rather than a town festival. That remoteness also explains why the memory can slip. History often drifts toward the familiar name on a map. Promontory Summit asks you to remember a quieter location where something thunderously important happened once and then moved on. For a time, trains detoured by promontory branch decisions and business rivalries. After celebration fades, operations begin, and that is when rivalry can reappear in paperwork. The early connection did not instantly become the simplest route for everyday travel and freight. Instead, decisions about ownership, fees, and control shaped how trains actually moved. A branch line can be built for reasons that have nothing to do with scenery and everything to do with bargaining. When companies disagree, passengers and shippers can find themselves traveling a path that exists to satisfy contracts rather than convenience. Schedules adjust. Crews learn new turning points. Stations gain sudden importance, then lose it again when deals change. This is a revealing chapter because it shows the railroad as a living system, not a single finished object. The nation likes the image of a final spike and a clean connection. The reality includes detours created by human competition, where steel follows the contours of business as faithfully as it follows the contours of land. Later route changes shifted the main line, leaving Promontory quieter and historic. Railroads are constantly rewriting themselves because the best route on paper can become the wrong route in practice. As traffic grew, companies looked for paths that were faster, flatter, and cheaper to maintain. That meant building new alignments and redirecting the main flow of trains. When the main line moved, the old route did not vanish, but it stepped out of the daily spotlight. What had been the center of national attention became a quieter stretch of track, and then a memory. This shift is part of what makes the original meeting place feel almost dreamlike. A site can hold an event that changes the nation, and then return to silence when commerce chooses a different corridor. Over time, the quiet became meaningful. It allowed the landscape to preserve the shape of the story without the constant noise of heavy traffic. The place became less a transportation artery and more a historical marker, where you can stand and imagine the moment when the future arrived and then rolled away. A polished ceremonial tie was used, then preserved as a prized artifact. The final connection involved more than a spike. It involved a special tie that was prepared to look worthy of the moment. It was meant to be seen, photographed, and remembered, which is very different from a tie meant to soak up weather, grit, and oil for decades. After the ceremony, it was treated like a relic. That choice tells you something about the era's sense of invention. People understood they had witnessed a turning point, so they saved a physical fragment of it, like a museum piece created in real time. The tie also carries a quieter meaning. A railroad is made of millions of parts that disappear into the background. Preserving one tie is a way of saying, this particular piece stood in for all the others. It is a reminder that history often survives through objects that were never meant to be extraordinary. A wooden beam, briefly polished and honored, became a bridge between daily labor and national memory. Telegraph clicks marked the final hammer strokes when the real strikes missed. In the crowd, the hammer was supposed to land cleanly on the spike because ceremony demands precision. Human hands do not always cooperate. When the striker missed, the moment could have become awkward, yet technology rescued it. A telegraph circuit was arranged so each intended blow could be signaled by a key, which sent crisp clicks to listeners far away. That meant the public story could stay smooth even if the physical action stumbled. It is a wonderfully modern twist. The nation experienced the event through a mediated rhythm, not through the sound of metal on metal at the site. The clicks became the heartbeat of completion, and the audience accepted them as the true marker. This detail also reveals something tender about performance. People wanted the final act to feel perfect because the railroad represented progress and control. The telegraph delivered that feeling. It turned a messy human moment into a clean, shared signal, and it showed how communication technology could shape reality as much as report it. The simple word "done" sped across wires and into headlines. There is something almost startling about reducing a continental achievement to a single word. Yet that is what happened, because telegraphy rewards brevity and clarity. One short message could confirm what thousands had been waiting to hear, and its simplicity made it easy to repeat. Editors could set it in type within minutes. Operators could pass it along without misunderstanding. Crowds could grasp it instantly. A word like that becomes a kind of stamp. It turns complicated labor, conflict, and planning into an unmistakable conclusion. The power of "done" is that it leaves no room for doubt, and doubt had hovered over the project for years. People worried about finance, weather, politics, and whether the land itself would allow success. When the message arrived, uncertainty collapsed into certainty. It also created a new expectation. If this could be done, what else might be possible? In that way, the word carried a second meaning. It did not only close a chapter, it opened an appetite for bigger, faster, and more connected futures. The last rails were laid by Chinese crews on one side. As the finish approached, the work became more visible, and that visibility carried its own tension. Chinese track crews had already proven themselves in the most punishing conditions, yet public recognition rarely matched their contribution. Near the end, their skill showed in the steady pace of placing rail, aligning joints, and driving spikes with practiced accuracy. There was pride in doing the final approach well, because every eye felt like it was judging not only speed, but competence. These workers also carried a private weight. Many had endured discrimination, wage pressure, and isolation, and they knew celebration might not include them in the way it included others. Still, the rails advanced under their hands. That fact matters because it anchors the story in people, not abstractions. It reminds you that the closing miles were not laid by a faceless workforce. They were laid by men whose labor had been treated as ordinary until the nation needed the miracle it produced. Their presence at the end forces the record to be more honest. The last rails were laid by Irish crews on the other side. On the eastern approach, many of the track workers were Irish immigrants and Irish Americans who had come through hardship long before they ever lifted a rail. Railroad labor offered wages, but it also demanded endurance under grueling conditions and constant risk. Near completion, these crews were pushing through a landscape that tested supplies and patience, and they were doing it under the pressure of comparison. Every mile felt like a schoolboard. Their work required coordination that looks simple only after it is done. Rails had to be carried, set, and fixed with joints that would hold under heavy traffic. A mistake could mean a derailment later, and the men laying track understood that responsibility even if no one applauded it. When the final connection happened, the story often turns into a photograph of leaders and locomotives. Yet one side of that connection was built by immigrant labor that had been treated with suspicion in many cities. This fact highlights a strange American pattern. The nation depends on newcomers for its biggest achievements, then struggles to give them full credit for the country they helped build. Track gauge decisions tied the West to the standard used across much of America. A railroad is only truly connected when its wheels can roll from one line to another without stopping. That is why track gauge mattered so much, because a mismatch would force freight to be unloaded and reloaded at the break. Imagine sacks of flour, barrels, mail, and machinery being lifted by hand just because rails were spaced differently. Standard gauge reduced that friction, and it let the transcontinental connection feel seamless in practice, not only in speeches. It also shaped the future, because standardization invites expansion. Once a common gauge is chosen, new lines tend to follow it, and a continent begins to behave like one system. That decision influenced where factories shipped goods, where farmers sent crops, and where travelers could go without changing cars. It is easy to treat gauge as a technical detail. In reality, it was a national agreement about compatibility, and compatibility is what turns a track into a network. Bridges over rivers demanded timber trestles first, then stronger replacements later. Rivers did not care about deadlines. They flooded, shifted channels, and ate away at banks, and the railroad had to cross them anyway. Early solutions were often timber trestles, built fast from available wood and practical know-how. Crews drove piles, framed bents, and braced the structure so it could hold a train that weighed far more than any wagon. These bridges were feats of speed and courage, and they were also temporary by nature. Water rots wood. Ice crushes supports. Fire can erase months of work in an hour. As traffic increased, many trestles were replaced with stronger designs, because a bridge that works for a first train might not survive years of heavier loads. That cycle tells a deeper story. The railroad was built in layers. First came what could be done quickly to open the route. Then came upgrades that made it dependable. The continent was crossed not once, but repeatedly, as each crossing was improved and reinforced. The Dale Creek Bridge became notorious for terrifying crossings in Wyoming winds. There are bridges that passengers admire, and bridges that passengers grip their seats and pray through. Dale Creek was the second kind. It stood high above the water, exposed to the open sweep of Wyoming weather, and early trains crossed it knowing the structure could sway under brutal gusts. The height alone could unsettle people. Add a narrow track, a long drop, and a locomotive pushing forward like it has no fear, and the crossing becomes an ordeal. Engineers and crews understood the risk, and they often reduced speed, listening for strange sounds and watching for signs of trouble. Stories of the bridge traveled faster than the trains, because fear makes good conversation. That notoriety mattered. It reminded everyone that a railroad is not just a route on a map. It is a chain of daring structures, and one weak link can haunt an entire system. When later improvements made crossings safer, the memory of Dale Creek still carried the thrill of early railroading on the edge. Sherman Summit tested engines with thin air and punishing grades. Climbing to Sherman Summit was a lesson in limits. Steam power depends on fire, water, and air, and high elevation changes the way an engine breathes. The grades demanded sustained effort, and the cold could complicate everything from lubrication to pressure. Crews had to think ahead, because a train that loses momentum on a steep climb can become a heavy problem with no easy fix. Helpers were often needed, which meant coordinating multiple locomotives like a single team. Firemen worked hard, feeding the furnace while watching water levels and pressure, because a mistake could be catastrophic. Passengers might feel only a slower pace and a sharper chill. The crew felt the strain in every vibration. Sherman Summit became a proving ground where planning mattered as much as horsepower. It forced the railroad to respect the physics of altitude, and it rewarded careful technique. Reaching the top was not only a milestone, it was a statement that the line could climb into harsh country and still keep its promise. Laramie's plains offered speed, but winter winds could still halt trains. Wide open country can look easy, because there are fewer cliffs to blast and fewer tunnels to dig. Laramie's plains could allow fast track laying and fast running, and that tempted people to believe the hard part was over. Then winter arrived with its own engineering. Wind can drive snow into drifts that form and reform even after crews clear them. It can also cut visibility to nothing, turning a straight track into a blind corridor. Cold thickens grease, stiffens metal, and punishes anyone who has to work outdoors for hours. A stalled train becomes a dangerous shelter because passengers and crews still need heat, food, and water while they wait. On the plains, the challenge was not climbing. It was exposure. There was nowhere to hide from weather that had miles to gather strength. The railroad learned that flat land still demands respect, and that speed is only possible when nature allows it. Alkali deserts challenged water supplies, livestock, and human endurance. In some stretches, the land looks like it has been rinsed of comfort. Alkali flats can carry salty dust that stings eyes and dries throats, and water sources can be scarce or unpleasant. For crews and animals, this was not a poetic hardship. It was a daily threat. Livestock hauling supplies could weaken quickly without reliable water, and weakened animals mean fewer deliveries and slower work. People suffered too. Dry air pulls moisture from the body, and the glare off pale ground can exhaust you in a way that feels like fever. Even when water was found, it might be mineral heavy and difficult to use, which added another layer of planning. Camps had to decide how much water to reserve for drinking, cooking, washing, and engines. Decisions could feel cruel because every need was real. These desert challenges reveal how the railroad depended on more than rails and money. It depended on logistics that could keep living bodies functioning in places that did not offer easy mercy. Camps dealt with scurvy fears, leading to careful food planning. Scurvy sounds like an old sailing problem, but remote work camps could face similar risks when fresh foods were rare. When diets lean too heavily on salt meat and flour, bodies begin to fail in slow, frightening ways. Gums bleed. Wounds heal poorly. Energy collapses. Railroad crews and their cooks did not always know the science of vitamins, yet they knew the pattern of sickness. That knowledge shaped what they tried to provide when possible, including dried fruits, vegetables, and other sources of acidity and variety. Supply officers learned that a healthy crew is a productive crew, and sickness could be as costly as a broken bridge. The problem also made certain deliveries feel urgent. A barrel of apples or a shipment of onions could matter more than fancy equipment in the short term. This is a powerful reminder that the Transcontinental project was built by human bodies with fragile needs. Steel can wait. A body cannot. Good food was not comfort. It was survival strategy. Medical care was limited, so injuries often became life-changing tragedies. Railroad building was full of sharp tools, heavy loads, blasting powder, and long days that dulled caution. When something went wrong, the next question was grim. How far is real help? Many camps had only basic supplies, and a few people with practical experience, not a fully equipped doctor and hospital. Infection was a constant fear, because a small cut could turn serious quickly. Broken bones could heal badly when splints were improvised and transport was rough. Pain relief was limited, and surgery could be terrifying. Even when a doctor was nearby, the conditions were not kind. Dust, cold, and poor lighting all made treatment harder. This reality shaped behavior. Workers learned to be careful around machinery, and they also learned a kind of acceptance, because risk was part of the job's wages. The human cost of the railroad is not only measured in deaths, it is measured in people who survived, yet carried permanent damage home. Each scar is part of the line's hidden history. Explosions, rockfalls, and avalanches made construction one of America's deadliest jobs. Building across the West meant working with forces that do not forgive small mistakes. Explosives could misfire or detonate early. Rock loosened by drilling could fall without warning. Snow could shift from stable to lethal in a heartbeat. Add fatigue, rushed schedules, and the constant pressure to keep moving, and danger becomes a daily companion. The most chilling part is how ordinary these risks could feel. A blast that went wrong was not always a dramatic headline. It was a missing worker at roll call. a damaged tunnel face that had to be cleared again, a camp that grew quiet for a day, then returned to work because the project did not pause for grief. This is not included to sensationalize, but to honor reality. The railroad was not built by mythic heroes who were untouched by harm. It was built by people who accepted extraordinary risk for ordinary pay, and whose families often received little more than a terse explanation. The line carries their story, even when their names are lost. Some workers saved wages to start businesses in the very towns they built. Not everyone saw the railroad only as a job. Some saw it as a moving ladder. A laborer might spend months living in tents, eating simple meals, and sending little money anywhere, because the goal was to gather enough to change life later. When a camp turned into a town, opportunity appeared. A small savings could become a toolkit for a repair shop. It could become a stake in a boarding house. It could become inventory for a general store that served crews, travelers, and new settlers. These businesses often began modestly, with long hours and a willingness to do whatever customers needed. Yet they could grow quickly in a rail town where demand arrived on the schedule. This pattern helps explain why the railroad transformed society beyond transportation. It created new local economies almost overnight, and it allowed some workers to shift from wage labor to ownership within a single decade. There is a quiet drama in that. People who had swung hammers on the edge of nowhere could later greet passengers from behind a counter, watching trains arrive like clockwork, knowing they helped bring the town into existence. The railroad made national markets, letting prices and goods move faster. Before the rails linked coasts, many Americans lived inside local economies that behaved like separate worlds. A bad harvest in one region might not be relieved by grain from another because transport was slow and costly. With a continuous rail route, merchants could buy and sell with a wider horizon. Grain, flour, cloth, tools, and countless everyday items began to move in larger volumes on more predictable schedules. That predictability did something subtle and powerful. It narrowed the gap between what a product cost in one place and what it cost in another, because supply could respond. People started to think in national terms. A farmer could imagine distant buyers. A storekeeper could plan inventory by season, not by luck. Even risk began to change, because a shipment delayed by weeks could now arrive in days. The railroad did not only carry freight, it carried the idea that the country could function as one marketplace. It linked Eastern factories to Western resources with unprecedented efficiency. Industrial America ran on inputs, and the West held many of them. With reliable rail service, Eastern manufacturers could draw on Western ores, timber, and agricultural products more steadily, while Western producers could order finished machinery and spare parts without waiting on slow wagon routes. That two-way flow encouraged specialization. A sawmill region could focus on timber. A mining camp could focus on extraction. A factory town could focus on production. Each could lean on the rails to connect the chain. The change also affected decision-making. Investors were more willing to fund a mine or a mill when they could see a clear transportation path. Rail schedules helped turn raw materials into planned supply, rather than occasional windfalls. Over time, this made the country feel less like scattered frontiers and more like an integrated system of inputs and outputs. The railroad became a moving handshake between regions, making distant work depend on each other with new intensity. It helped San Francisco's growth by connecting California to wider trade networks. San Francisco already faced the Pacific, but the railroad gave it a stronger backdoor to the rest of the continent. Goods arriving by ship could be distributed inland with less delay, and products from California could reach eastern markets without a long sea voyage around Prow. South America, That shift made the city more than a regional port. It became a gateway where ocean routes and rail routes met, which attracts banks, warehouses, brokers, and entrepreneurs who thrive on movement. The railroad also changed migration patterns into the Bay Area. New arrivals could reach the city with greater certainty, and that meant more labor, more customers, and more cultural mixing. Businesses that served travelers, freight, and finance grew quickly in that environment. The city's influence expanded because it was no longer a coastal endpoint. It became a node in a continent-spanning network, with the Pacific on one side and a steel corridor on the other. It reshaped military logistics, moving men and supplies in days. When a nation can shift resources quickly, it changes what leaders consider possible. The railroad allowed large quantities of food, uniforms, ammunition, and equipment to travel on scheduled trains, which reduced the need to stockpile. Everything in one place. That flexibility mattered during crises, because it let the government respond faster to uprisings, disasters, and international worries. It also changed training and organization, since units could be moved to new posts without months of travel. Rail transport demanded coordination. Quartermasters had to think in carloads, timetables, and transfer points, not just wagons and trails. Even morale was affected, because soldiers could travel with less physical exhaustion, arriving more ready to operate. This is one of those quiet revolutions where the rails are not the headline, yet they redefine capacity. A country that can move quickly can project authority differently. The railroad became a tool of reach, and reach changes choices long before a single order is given. It made cross-country family visits possible within a single season. A family separated by the continent once had to treat reunions as rare events, because travel could swallow months and savings. With a continuous rail journey, visiting became imaginable as a bounded trip. You could leave, arrive, spend time, and return without losing an entire year. That change shaped emotional life as much as economic life. Grandparents could meet children they had only known through letters. Siblings could gather for weddings, funerals, and anniversaries with a sense that presence was possible. The visit still cost money, and the ride could be uncomfortable, but the timeline stopped being mythical. Even planning conversations shifted. Instead of saying, maybe someday, people could say, after harvest or before winter. That makes distance feel less final. It also changes migration. Someone might dare to move west, knowing they could return to see home again. The railroad did not erase loneliness, but it turned separation into something that could be bridged by intention, not only by fate. It changed journalism, because reporters could chase stories by rail. News once traveled at the pace of horses and ships, and reporting often meant staying put and waiting for information to arrive. Rail travel flipped that dynamic. A journalist could board a train and go toward the story, reaching distant events while public interest was still hot. That mobility created a new kind of competition. Papers wanted faster updates, sharper details, and more vivid accounts than rivals could provide. Reporters began to cultivate sources across regions because a rail ticket made a faraway interview possible. Disasters, trials, political speeches, and economic booms could be covered with greater immediacy, which changed how the public experienced the nation. Readers started to expect timely coverage of places they had never seen. This also shaped the style of writing. Travel narratives blended with reporting, because the journey itself became part of the story. The railroad gave journalism a wider stage and a quicker tempo. It helped turn the country into a shared audience for events happening far beyond the local square. It changed politics, because national leaders could reach the West more easily. A politician's influence grows when travel stops being an expedition. With rail access, presidents, candidates, and party leaders could tour more widely. meet voters face to face, and deliver speeches in places that had once been quanti, politically distant. That mattered for legitimacy. When people see a leader in person, the government feels less abstract. The railroad also affected policy itself, because officials could inspect projects, towns, and disputes firsthand, rather than relying entirely on reports. Campaign strategies adapted. Organizers planned routes, crowds, and press coverage around train schedules, turning politics into a kind of moving theater. Western states and territories gained leverage too. If leaders could arrive, then local concerns could be presented with more urgency. The trip itself became a statement. A whistle stop in a small town signaled attention, and attention can translate into votes and funding. Over time, rail travel helped knit the West more tightly into national political life. It reduced the sense that power lived only in distant capitals, because power could now arrive on the next train. It changed weather risk, since mountain storms now threatened schedules and commerce. Before the railroad, a blizzard in a mountain pass might trap a few travelers, but it did not freeze an entire supply chain on a timetable. Once business depended on scheduled arrivals, weather became an economic force that could ripple across regions. A storm could delay perishable freight, postpone passenger connections, and disrupt contracts that assumed trains would run. Rail managers began to treat forecasts and seasonal patterns as planning tools, and crews had to develop routines for clearing snow, repairing washouts, and reopening lines quickly. Merchants felt the effects too. A missed delivery could empty shelves, delay construction projects, or push prices upward in places that depended on regular shipments. Even language changed in daily conversation. People began to talk about delays, connections, and missed departures as part of ordinary life. The railroad made nature's unpredictability more visible because the whole system was designed for regularity. When weather broke that regularity, it revealed how much modern life was starting to rely on synchronized movement. It changed mapping, pushing survey knowledge into remote valleys and passes. Building a railroad required more than courage. It required detailed understanding of terrain that many Americans had never seen. Survey teams measured elevations, traced river crossings, and recorded potential routes, turning blank spaces on popular maps into labeled corridors. That knowledge did not stay locked in engineering offices. It flowed into published atlases, newspaper illustrations, and guidebooks that helped ordinary people imagine the West with greater clarity. Place names became standardized through repeated use, and certain landmarks gained national recognition because the railroad made them part of a shared journey. Mapping also gained a practical audience. Settlers wanted reliable information about water sources, valleys, and nearby towns, and rail routes helped organize that information into accessible forms. In a sense, the railroad taught the country how to picture itself. It connected not only places, but also mental geography. Once a pass is surveyed and printed, it becomes real to people who have never stood there. That shift turns exploration into knowledge, and knowledge into movement. It changed language, making transcontinental a symbol of national ambition. Some words carry a feeling, not just a definition. Transcontinental began to sound like proof that the country could think bigger than any one region. It appeared in speeches, advertisements, and celebratory writing as a kind of verbal trophy. The term suggested scale, speed, and modernity, and it helped sell everything from tickets to investment schemes. People used it to describe more than rails. It became shorthand for a new era of reach, where projects were expected to span huge distances and overcome massive obstacles. That shift matters because language shapes imagination. Once a society normalizes a word like that, it becomes easier to propose the next big thing. The term also smoothed over complexity. It made a tangled story of labor, politics, and consequence sound clean and triumphant. That is part of its power and part of its danger. Still, the word endured because it captured a real turning point. It named a moment when the continent stopped feeling like separate chapters and started feeling like one long sentence. Building the line required industrial-scale iron production and steady rail rolling mills. A continent-wide railroad begins far from the frontier, inside roaring mills where glowing iron is stretched into long, straight rails. These rails were not handcrafted curiosities. They were mass-produced lifelines that had to match in size, strength, and shape, mile after mile. Rolling mills worked with relentless rhythm, because construction crews on the far end could not lay track if shipments slowed. Each rail had to survive vibration, weather, and heavy loads, so consistency mattered as much as quantity. Behind every train photo was a hidden parade of furnaces, rollers, cranes, and workers who rarely appeared in the celebration scenes. The supply chain was its own expedition. Raw material had to be mined, transported, smelted, rolled, and shipped to staging points, often across thousands of miles. When rails arrived late, the frontier went quiet. When rails arrived on time, the landscape changed in a day. Spikes, fish plates, and bolts were tiny parts that held a continent together. Big projects depend on small pieces that nobody praises. A rail cannot simply rest on ties and hope for the best. It must be fastened, joined, and kept from creeping loose under constant pounding. That meant mountains of spikes, stacks of joint bars, and buckets of bolts that had to be counted, hauled, and protected from loss. These parts were easy to overlook and easy to misplace, yet a missing box could stop a crew cold. On the work line, the tiny hardware became a daily ritual. Men reached for it with practiced motions, like musicians reaching for notes. A good joint meant smoother travel. A bad joint meant jolts, noise, and danger that grew with every passing wheel. The beauty of the railroad is often described in sweeping terms. Its reliability came from humble metal pieces doing repetitive work, holding steel to wood and steel to steel, through heat, snow, and vibration. The continent stayed connected because the smallest parts did not fail. Ballast stone had to be sourced locally or hauled at great expense. Track is not stable just because it is straight. It needs a bed that drains water, resists shifting, and locks ties into place. That is what ballast does, and it demands a staggering amount of stone. Ideally, the railroad found suitable rock near the line, because hauling ballast long distances could cost more than people expect. Not every region offered the right material. Some places had good rock, but it was hard to quarry. Other places had plenty of gravel, but it did not interlock well enough to hold the track firm. When local sources failed, ballast had to be brought in, which added delays, extra labor, and extra strain on transport. Crews spread it, leveled it, and tamped it until the roadbed behaved like a single, solid structure. Then, weather tested it. Rain tried to wash fines away. Frost tried to heave it. The ballast quietly fought back, keeping the rails where they belonged. Without it, speed would have been a fantasy, and derailments would have been routine. Creosoted ties came later, but early ties still demanded endless timber. Every mile of track needed thousands of wooden ties, and those ties were in a constant battle with rot, insects, and moisture. Early on, preservation methods were limited, which meant ties wore out faster and replacements became a continuing expense. That reality created a long appetite for timber. Forests near the line were cut not only for ties, but also for bridges, sheds, stations, and the daily needs of camps. The demand did not end when the last spike went in. A railroad is a living structure that must be renewed. Each tie is a small foundation block, and if too many weaken, the whole line suffers. Later treatments like creosote extended tie life, but the first decades depended on sheer volume and constant replacement. This detail reveals something important. The railroad was not just iron conquering space. It was wood as well, quietly sacrificed in enormous numbers. The continent was stitched together on a lattice of trees, cut, shaped, and laid down into the earth, tie after tie. Steam engines needed constant maintenance, so roundhouses and shops multiplied. A steam locomotive is powerful, but it is also needy. It burns, boils, shakes, and strains itself with every trip. That means it cannot live on the main line alone. It needs places where skilled hands can tighten bolts, replace worn parts, clean fireboxes, and inspect wheels before a small problem becomes a disaster. Roundhouses and repair shops grew up along the route like essential organs. They stocked tools, spare components, and the expertise to keep engines reliable. These facilities also created new kinds of work. Machinists, boilermakers, carpenters, and blacksmiths became part of railroading's daily heartbeat, not occasional helpers. A town with a major shop could thrive because payrolls were steady and skills were valued. There is a romance in the image of a locomotive rushing across open country. The less glamorous truth is that it spent a lot of time resting, being examined, and being repaired. The railroad stayed fast because it made room for stillness, where maintenance could turn wear into readiness. Telegraph operators became essential railroad workers, not just messengers. Once trains shared long stretches of single track, communication became a safety system. Telegraph operators were the voices of the line, sending and receiving orders that determined who moved, who waited, and where trains would meet. Their work demanded calm attention. A missed message could cause confusion. Confusion on a railroad can become catastrophe. Operators listened to the rhythm of clicks and translated them into instructions that kept schedules coherent across vast distances. They also served as local hubs of information. Travelers asked about delays. Merchants asked about freight arrivals. Station agents depended on wire updates to plan loading and transfers. In storms and emergencies, the operator could be the first link in a chain of response. This job was mentally demanding in a way the public often missed, because it looked quiet from the outside. Yet the entire system leaned on this quiet. Steel gave trains a path. The telegraph gave them coordination, and coordination is what turns movement into an organized network rather than a series of dangerous guesses. Dispatching trains safely required new rulebooks and new discipline. A transcontinental railroad is not safe because it is impressive. It is safe because people agree on rules and follow them even when tired, rushed, or tempted to bend them. Dispatching required standardized procedures for right-of-way, meeting points, and how to handle delays. Conductors and engineers had to treat written orders with seriousness because an assumption could put two trains on the same stretch of track. The discipline was cultural as much as technical. Crews learned to check watches, confirm signals, and respect the authority of dispatch instructions that came from far away. New kinds of paperwork became part of survival. Train orders, manifests, and schedules were not bureaucracy for its own sake. They were tools that kept steel from colliding at speed. The need for rules also shaped technology. Better signaling, improved brakes, and more reliable communication methods grew out of hard lessons. This is one of the quiet triumphs of the railroad era. It taught a sprawling system of strangers to cooperate under pressure. following shared expectations across thousands of miles. Barely passenger cars offered a rough ride, with smoke, soot, and cinders. Long-distance rail travel could feel thrilling, and it could also feel punishing. Cars rattled, swayed, and clattered over joints that were never perfectly smooth. Windows let in fresh air, but they also invited smoke and gritty cinders that stung eyes and coated clothing. Heat could be uneven, and cold drafts could creep in around imperfect fittings. The noise was constant, from wheels and whistles to the groan of wood and metal under strain. Yet people kept boarding, because the alternative was slower, riskier, and far more exhausting. Inside the cars, a temporary society formed. Strangers shared space, traded stories, watched landscapes scroll by, and tried to sleep despite vibration. Comfort was not guaranteed, so travelers learned small strategies. They packed blankets, wrapped food, and chose seats with care. The roughness is part of the wonder. The railroad made distance manageable, but it did not make it effortless. You earned the new speed with a body that had to endure the journey's grit. Dining and sleeping services evolved quickly because long journeys demanded comfort. As more people rode long distances, the railroad discovered a simple truth. Travelers will pay for comfort when the road is long. Early trips relied on station meals and whatever you packed, but that was awkward, unpredictable, and often unpleasant. Over time, services improved. Dining arrangements became more organized, and sleeping accommodations developed to make overnight travel possible without sheer misery. This shift changed who could travel. A journey that is physically exhausting discourages families, older travelers, and anyone who cannot afford discomfort. Better food and better rest widened the audience, which increased revenue and encouraged further upgrades. Comfort also became part of the railroad's identity. Companies competed not only on schedules, but on experience. A smoother night's sleep and a reliable meal could turn a daunting trip into something people recommended. This evolution is fascinating because it shows the railroad learning to serve human needs, not only mechanical ones. It was building a new kind of moving public space, where service, privacy, and practicality had to share the same narrow corridor. Accidents pushed new safety inventions, from better brakes to stronger couplers. Early railroading was fast, and it was often unforgiving. When accidents happened, they exposed weaknesses in equipment and procedure that could not be ignored if the system was going to grow. Braking systems improved because stopping a heavy train reliably is not optional. Couplers and car connections became stronger because breakaways could turn a train into multiple uncontrolled hazards. Safety also meant visibility and warnings, so signaling practices and equipment continued to develop. Many changes were driven by hard experience, because lessons in railroading can arrive suddenly and brutally. Yet each improvement made the system more trustworthy, which invited more passengers, more freight, and more dependence on schedules. Safety innovation is a story of learning under pressure. It is also a story of compassion entering engineering, because each invention was shaped by the desire to prevent injury and death. The railroad helped invent modern expectations about transport. People began to believe that speed should not require sacrifice, and that technology should be improved until routine travel is not an act of courage. The railroad helped turn Utah's settlements into national crossroads for commerce. When the rails arrived, Utah stopped being only a destination for those who meant to stay. It became a place people and goods passed through, which is a different kind of importance. Freight that once crawled by wagon could now roll in steady waves, and merchants learned to think beyond local demand. Warehouses, yards, and transfer points made certain settlements feel like hinges on a continent-sized door. A farmer could ship outward. A shopkeeper could stock items that had been rare luxuries. Travelers moved through with money in their pockets and stories on their tongues, and that flow supported hotels, restaurants, and repair trades. Rail access also drew new migrants who wanted opportunity near dependable transport, which changed the region's social and economic balance. A crossroads is not just an intersection. It is a place where choices multiply. Utah's communities found themselves at the center of routes they did not control, yet could learn to benefit from. It accelerated Nevada mining shipments, especially when boomtowns demanded speed. A mining boom is a race between hope and reality. The ore has value only if it can move, and boomtowns live on momentum. Rail transport gave Nevada's mining districts a faster way to send heavy loads towards smelters and buyers, and that speed changed what investors considered worthwhile. A claim that seemed too remote could suddenly look promising if a rail connection lowered transport costs and reduced delays. The same speed worked in reverse. Machinery, replacement parts, and skilled workers could reach remote sites more reliably, which helped operations scale up. Rail shipments also made price swings feel sharper because ore could hit the market quickly when demand rose, and mines could also be squeezed quickly when demand fell. That is the dark mirror of acceleration. The railroad could feed a boom, and it could also speed the moment a boom collapsed. For the people in those towns, the train was not scenery. It was the difference between a dream that could pay and a dream that ran out of time. It made Wyoming and Nebraska more connected and more contested. Connection can bring opportunity, and it can also bring pressure. In Wyoming and Nebraska, the railroad linked distant communities to national markets and national politics, which changed daily life in ways both exciting and disruptive. Newcomers arrived more steadily. Land values shifted quickly. Local economies began to depend on rail schedules, which meant a delay could ripple into wages and prices. At the same time, the corridor became contested space. Ranchers, farmers, merchants, and rail officials often wanted different outcomes from the same landscape. Rights of way, grazing access, water use, and town sites could become flashpoints because each group understood that the rails would shape the region's future. Rail towns competed with each other too, because a depot, a yard, or a junction could decide which place became a hub. The railroad did not only pass through. It rearranged stakes, and it made the plains feel less like open possibility and more like a map of competing claims. It enabled mass tourism to places like the Great Basin and the Rockies. Ore used to belong mostly to explorers, miners, and those who had no choice but to travel. Rail travel turned wonder into an option because it offered a structured way to reach landscapes that had once required weeks of rough riding. The Great Basin and the Rockies became accessible to broader crowds, including travelers who wanted views, clean air, and stories to carry home. Hotels, guides, and local promoters began to treat scenery as an attraction worth organizing around. A train stop could become a gateway to a canyon, a summit, or a hot spring, and the presence of visitors could reshape local economies. This also changed how Americans imagined their own country. A mountain range stopped being a distant barrier on a map and became a place you could personally witness. Tourism sounds light, yet it is powerful. It teaches people to value a landscape not only for what it can produce, but for what it can make you feel, even through a window streaked with soot. It inspired art and literature, including global adventure stories set on tight schedules. The railroad brought a new sensation into storytelling, the sensation of time being chased. Writers and artists seized on the image of a train cutting across immense distances because it made modern life feel dramatic. A timetable became a plot device. A missed connection became suspense. The West became both a setting and a symbol, shaped by speed, smoke, and the thrill of departure. Illustrators loved the contrast between steel and wilderness, between a tiny train and a vast horizon. The railroad also changed how travel narratives sounded. Journeys could be told as sequences of stations and landscapes, each arriving with a whistle and a name. These stories traveled widely, and they influenced how people around the world pictured the American West as a place of motion and risk. The cultural impact matters because it shows the railroad did not only move freight, it moved imagination. It taught audiences to expect progress to be fast, dramatic, and measurable, and it turned the act of crossing the continent into a kind of modern myth. It also inspired tall tales, from track-laying contests to frontier legends. Where real feats are astonishing, exaggeration arrives almost automatically. Along the railroad, stories grew the way tumbleweeds grow, picking up details as they roll. A fast day of track laying could become a superhuman sprint in the telling. A hard winter rescue could become a lone hero story by the next retelling at a saloon table. These tales were not only entertainment, they were social glue for camps filled with strangers, because laughing together builds trust, and trust matters when danger is near. Tall tales also help people process stress. When work is exhausting and uncertain, turning it into a story you can laugh at gives you a sense of control. Over time, these legends shaped how outsiders imagined the railroad frontier. They highlighted toughness, luck, and spectacle, while smoothing over boredom, injury, and routine. That contrast is fascinating. The railroad produced both documentation and folklore. It created a paper trail of contracts and schedules, and it also created a drifting cloud of stories that made the frontier feel larger than life. Railroad police, company rules, and federal law began shaping daily life along the line. A railroad is a moving asset, and assets attract theft, conflict, and disputes about authority. Companies responded with rules and enforcement that could feel strict, especially in places where local government was thin. Railroad police guarded freight, protected payrolls, and tried to control trouble around depots and work camps. Company policies regulated behavior on trains and in yards, because accidents and fights could halt operations. Federal law also gained new reach, since the railroad corridor tied distant regions more tightly to national power. For people living near the line, this meant more than an occasional uniform. It meant a shift in who could order someone to move along, who could investigate a theft, and whose rules applied on company property. The railroad became a kind of moving jurisdiction with its own expectations. This is one of the less romantic legacies of the line. Connection is not neutral. It brings systems of control as well as systems of trade, and along the rails, those systems often arrived quickly and stayed. Worker strikes and protests revealed how much power the companies held. A railroad depends on labor, and labor eventually notices when the balance of power is tilted. When workers protested wages, hours, or conditions, they were not only arguing with a foreman, they were challenging companies that controlled transport, land, and local employment in many rail towns. A strike could halt freight, delay mail, and shake investor confidence, so it became a public event rather than a private workplace dispute. Companies often responded with strong tactics because they feared that concessions in one place would spread elsewhere. Local communities could be torn since merchants depended on rail paychecks, yet also sympathized with neighbors who felt exploited. These conflicts revealed the railroad as a new kind of institution, larger than a single town and influential over entire regions. The protests also helped shape later labor organization, because workers learned that coordination mattered as much as courage. A railroad teaches timing. Strikes learned timing too, and the struggle over who controlled the timetable became part of the nation's industrial story. Railroad stations became community centers, carrying news, goods, and travelers. A station was not just a platform. It was where a town met the wider world on a schedule. People came to pick up packages, watch for relatives, and hear the latest rumors that arrived with passengers. Freight deliveries turned into small spectacles because crates and barrels hinted at what was changing in daily life. Local businesses clustered near depots, since foot traffic and shipments made those blocks valuable. Stations also shaped routine. The whistle became a time signal, and the arrival board became a kind of public calendar. In smaller places, the station agent held unusual influence because they controlled information about delays and arrivals. Even emotions collected there. Farewells, reunions, and first glimpses of a new home often happened under the same roof. Over time, stations helped towns feel less isolated, yet they also reminded people that movement was constant. The world did not stop at the edge of the settlement. It rolled through again and again on steel wheels. The line helped create modern supply chains, long before the term existed. Once a railroad could move freight reliably across long distance, businesses began to plan as if delivery was a feature you could count on. That encouraged coordination between producers, warehouses, and retailers, even if nobody used modern vocabulary for it. A factory could schedule output to meet shipping windows. A store could anticipate seasonal demand and place orders that arrived before shelves went empty. Perishable goods could be routed with more care, and repair parts could be stocked with fewer desperate backups. The railroad also encouraged the growth of intermediaries, including freight agents and distributors who specialized in moving items efficiently through the bow. Network. This mattered because it changed expectations. People started to trust that supplies would arrive, and trust changes behavior. It supports larger cities, wider trade, and more complex industries. The railroad did not only speed up a trip, it made coordination itself profitable, and that is one of the deepest transformations of the era. When movement becomes dependable, planning becomes a form of power. The first coast-to-coast rail trip still required connecting lines beyond the main link. The famous joining created the backbone, but a traveler still needed other railroads to truly cross from ocean to ocean. The new connection stitched together two big builders, yet it also depended on a patchwork of regional lines that had to agree on schedules, fares, and handoffs. A long trip could include waiting in unfamiliar stations, switching cars, and trusting that the next railroad would honor the promised connection. Baggage had to follow the same choreography, and mistakes could leave trunks stranded hundreds of miles away. This early era of through travel felt like a relay race. One company carried you to the edge of its world, then another took over. Even so, the existence of a mostly continuous rail journey changed what people believed was possible. The trip no longer required reinventing the plan at every frontier town. It could be imagined as one long itinerary, with transfers instead of reinventions. A later connection to the San Francisco Bay completed the Bay Area's rail link. Reaching California was one thing. Reaching the Bay itself, with its ports and dense commercial life, was another. The final leg mattered because it tied inland rail travel to shipping routes that could carry cargo across the Pacific and along the coast. Businesses cared about that link because warehouses, wharves, and financial services clustered near the water, and they needed a direct, reliable line of exchange with car. The interior. For passengers, the Bay connection made arrival feel complete. The journey ended not in a symbolic sense, but at a true hub where ferries, ships, and city streets could take over. This finishing touch also reshaped competition among towns. Communities that gained a strong bay link could grow faster, attract more investment, and claim a larger role in regional trade. It is a reminder that infrastructure is not finished when a map shows a line. It is finished when the line reaches the places where people actually live, trade, and connect outward. The original project proved America could build across deserts and mountain walls. The achievement was not only in laying track, it was in creating a method for doing the impossible repeatedly. Crews learned how to supply remote work sites, how to keep tools and food moving, and how to adapt when the land refused to cooperate. Deserts demanded discipline with water and planning. Mountains demanded patience with rock and weather. In both, the project forced a new kind of organization, with supervisors, schedules, and specialized teams that could solve problems at scale. This proved something to the public. The country could marshal industry, labor, and capital to reshape geography. That confidence mattered later, because it encouraged other big projects, other long routes, and other ideas that would have sounded absurd a generation earlier. Yet the proof was earned the hard way. It came from thousands of days where progress meant solving a fresh crisis with limited options. The railroad did not just cross obstacles. It taught the nation how to cross obstacles as a habit. It also proved ambition could outrun ethics, leaving hard questions behind. The railroad is thrilling to admire, but it is also unsettling to study closely. Decisions were made that favored speed and profit over fairness, and those decisions landed on real communities and real bodies. Workers faced harsh conditions and discrimination. Indigenous nations faced dispossession and violence tied to expansion. Political influence shaped routes, contracts, and oversight, and that influence sometimes rewarded insiders more than the public good. The project became a mirror. It showed how quickly a society can celebrate progress while minimizing who paid for it. That tension did not end in the 19th century. It became a pattern that later generations would recognize in other massive ventures. The hard questions remain. Who benefits first, and who is pushed aside? Who gets remembered, and who gets edited out? When a nation decides something must be built, what moral boundaries are treated as negotiable? The railroad invites awe, and it also demands honesty, because both are part of its legacy. Many original grades were later eased, showing how quickly engineering standards changed. The first builders did what they could with the tools, knowledge, and time they had. That often meant steeper grades and sharper curves than later engineers would accept. As locomotives became heavier and traffic increased, railroads looked back at those early choices and saw inefficiency and risk. A steep grade limits how much a train can pull. A tight curve increases wear on wheels and rails. So companies invested in improvements, carving new cuts, building new alignments, and smoothing routes that had once been celebrated as triumphs. This is a fascinating lesson in progress. The finished railroad was never truly finished. It was revised as expectations rose and technology advanced. What counted as acceptable in the first rush became outdated surprisingly fast. These changes also reveal the difference between proving a concept and optimizing a system. The original line proved the continent could be linked. Later work proved the link could be made faster, safer, and more economical, even if it required undoing parts of the original achievement. Some abandoned alignments still cut across landscapes like quiet scars. When a railroad changes its route, the old grade does not always disappear. Earthworks remain. A leveled shelf along a hillside, a raised embankment through a low valley, or a faint cut in the soil can linger for generations. In some places you can still trace the line by the way the land looks slightly too straight, slightly too intentional, compared to the surrounding terrain. These remnants feel haunting because they are human decisions preserved in dirt. They tell you where crews once struggled, why supply wagons once rolled, and where the first version of a national dream physically touched the ground. Abandoned does not mean meaningless. These alignments become outdoor archives. They show how routes were chosen and how later priorities changed those choices. They also invite imagination. A quiet grade can make you hear ghost sounds, not as fantasy, but as memory. You can picture a work camp nearby, a telegraph pole line, a hard day ending at dusk. The landscape holds the outline long after the trains leave. Golden Spike National Historic Site preserves the story where rails first joined. Some historic places are preserved because they are grand buildings. This one is preserved because it is a moment made visible on open ground. The site protects the setting where the joining became a symbol, and it helps visitors understand that the story is larger than a single photograph. Markers, exhibits, and the landscape itself give context that the celebration image cannot. You can sense distance there. You can feel how far the supply lines had to stretch. You can imagine the wind, the dust, and the temporary crowds who arrived for one day and then dispersed. Preservation matters because memory fades toward simplicity. A National Historic Site resists that fade by holding space for complexity, including the labor, the rivalry, and the consequences that followed. It also offers a rare experience. You can stand where people once stood and realize that history is not only dates and names. It is geography. It is terrain. It is the physical fact that two long lines of iron ended their separate journeys at the same place, and the nation decided to remember it. Modern trains still follow parts of that corridor, riding decisions made long ago. Even when track has been upgraded, realigned, or doubled, many corridors remain shaped by 19th century logic. Routes were chosen around passes, rivers, and workable grades, and those choices still influence where rail traffic flows today. Once a right-of-way is established, it becomes valuable. Land is acquired, bridges are built, and towns form around the line. Changing everything later is expensive and disruptive, so modern systems often inherit old pathways. That inheritance is visible in the way certain communities remain rail towns and in the way some valleys still serve as transportation funnels. It is also visible in the compromises. A route chosen to meet an urgent deadline might still impose limitations on speed or capacity long afterward. The corridor becomes a kind of fossilized decision with layers of improvement built on top. This continuity is fascinating because it shows how infrastructure shapes the future by refusing to move easily. One generation's choices become another generation's constraints and advantages, rolling forward with every passing train. The railroad's legacy includes both shared prosperity and lasting injustice. The line helped create wealth and connection that many people could feel in their daily lives. Goods became more available. Travel became more realistic. New towns formed, and some families found opportunity that would have been unreachable without rail access. At the same time, the benefits were not shared evenly, and the harms were not temporary. Indigenous displacement, ecological disruption, and exploitative labor practices were not side effects. They were woven into how expansion happened. That mixed legacy is part of why the transcontinental story still matters. It refuses to sit neatly in one emotional box. It can inspire pride in ingenuity and endurance, while also requiring grief and accountability. When we tell the story honestly, we can hold both truths without cancelling either. The railroad shows what humans can build when they coordinate at scale. It also shows what humans will rationalize when ambition becomes a national obsession. Remembering both is not a downbeat ending. It is a more mature kind of wonder, one that respects the real world and the people who lived through it. Every mile of iron stitched together people, economies, and futures across a continent. It is easy to picture the railroad as a single grand object, but its true power was cumulative. Each mile linked one more community to news, markets, and movement. Each mile made the next mile easier to supply, and it made the country feel more coherent in imagination. Over time, those miles created chains of dependence. A farmer planted with shipping in mind. A merchant ordered goods based on arrivals. A traveler planned life events around departure times. Entire industries adapted to the idea that distance could be managed. The railroad also stitched together stories. Immigrants and migrants carried language, recipes, music, and beliefs into new places, and those places changed in response. This stitching was not always gentle, and it was not always fair, but it was transformative. A continent that once felt like separated chapters began to read like a single narrative with shared references and shared rhythms. The rails were metal, but the scene they created ran through everyday life, turning far away into reachable and turning possibility into routine. As we come to the end of our journey tonight, the rails begin to fade back into the landscape. We have traveled across deserts that demanded endurance, through mountains that resisted every step forward, and into towns that rose, shifted, and sometimes disappeared. In the wake of passing trains, we followed iron laid by many hands, guided by ambition, shaped by conflict, and carried forward by hope. Along the way, we saw how distance changed its meaning, how time learned new rules, and how lives were altered simply because movement became possible. The Transcontinental Railroad was never just steel and timber. It was people working in heat and snow. It was camps glowing at night with lantern light. It was whistles echoing across open plains. It was letters arriving sooner than expected, and loved ones arriving sooner than dreamed. It stitched together economies and ideas, while also leaving deep questions in its wake. Those questions still linger in the land, in the routes we follow, and in the stories we tell. Now, there is nothing left to do but rest. Let the rhythm of the rails slow in your mind. Let the long lines stretch out into the dark, steady and complete. Allow your breathing to ease, your thoughts to drift, and the weight of the day to loosen its grip. The journey has been made. There is nowhere else you need to travel tonight. If you found comfort in this winding path through history, you are always welcome to join us again. Or you might consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a thought below. It helps this space reach others who may be listening late into the night, just as you are. And if you happen to still be awake, another story is waiting for you on the screen, ready to carry you onward. For now, let the tracks grow distant, the stations fall silent, and the world settle into stillness. Sleep well, and good night.